Story number 1. Shadows in the snowstorm. The first flakes of winter began to fall early that year in rural Maine, coating the landscape in a pristine blanket of white. I'm James Harper, a solitary writer who found solace in the quietude of the countryside, far from the relentless buzz of city life. My wife, Laura, and I had moved to our modest farmhouse in early January 2024, seeking a fresh start after years of bustling deadlines and empty apartments. Our home sat on the edge of Pine Ridge, a secluded area surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. The isolation was exactly what we needed, or so we thought. The first few weeks were idyllic. I spent my days typing away at my latest manuscript, while Laura tended to the garden and our 2 dogs roamed freely through the snow-covered yard. Life was simple, peaceful, and for a moment, perfect. But as the winter deepened, so did the sense of unease that settled over Pine Ridge. It began subtly at first, strange noises in the dead of night, shadows that seemed to move just beyond the corner of my eye, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. I dismissed it as the isolation getting to me, the mind playing tricks in the vast emptiness. Yet, the disturbances grew more frequent and unnerving. One particularly harsh evening in early March, a fierce snowstorm rolled in from the north, transforming Pine Ridge into a frozen wasteland. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow fell in relentless sheets, reducing visibility to mere feet. Laura and I were inside, huddled by the fireplace with a pot of tea, trying to ride out the storm. Our daughter, Emily, and her younger brother, Jake, were upstairs, their laughter muffled by the thick walls. As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of abating. The wind's fury intensified, shaking the windows and rattling the doors. Amidst the chaos, I decided to take a drive to the nearby town for supplies, knowing we were cut off from the rest of the world until morning. Bundling up in my warmest coat, I left a note for Laura and the kids, promising to be back before the storm worsened. The drive was treacherous, the roads slick with ice and snow. My headlights barely pierced the blinding whiteness. The landscape transformed into an otherworldly realm of shadows and silence. As I navigated the narrow, winding roads, the storm seemed to grow even more menacing, the wind howling like the cries of the lost. Suddenly, through the thick snowfall, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, barely discernible against the tempestuous backdrop. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed the car, the eerie stillness broken only by the roar of the storm. The figure didn't move, his presence both unsettling and inexplicable. I squinted through the windshield, trying to make out any features, but there was nothing human about it, just a dark silhouette against the swirling snow. Probably just a trick of the light, I muttered to myself. Though doubt gnawed at me, I considered stopping, but the treacherous conditions made it impossible. Instead, I edged forward cautiously, the car's tires struggling to maintain traction on the icy pavement. As I passed the figure, it seemed to watch me, its eyes, if they could be called that, fixed on my every move. A sense of dread settled over me, the feeling of being observed intensifying with each passing second. I accelerated slightly, hoping to leave the apparition behind. But as I did, the storm seemed to close in tighter, the snowflakes stinging my face like icy needles. The figure remained in my peripheral vision, constant, unnerving presence. When I finally reached the small town, the locals were sparse, their faces etched with worry and fatigue from the storm. I quickly grabbed the necessary supplies and decided to make the journey back home immediately. The drive felt interminable, the storm showing no mercy, the winds howling now interspersed with what I could only describe as faint whispers, indistinct voices carried by the gale. As midnight approached, the storm reached its zenith. The wind roared like a living beast, and the snow piled high against my windshield, reducing visibility to nearly nothing. Desperate to find shelter, I spotted a dilapidated gas station in the distance, its sign barely visible through the blizzard. I pulled over, the SUV struggling to come to a halt against the relentless storm. Inside, The gas station was deserted, the air thick with the scent of mildew and stale coffee. The single flickering light bulb cast long, distorted shadows across the counter. I approached the attendant's desk, hoping to find some semblance of comfort or at least a way to navigate through the storm. But the place was empty, save for an old radio humming softly in the corner, its static-filled tunes adding to the eerie atmosphere. As I sat down, trying to make sense of the strange occurrences, the whispers grew louder, their mournful tones almost intelligible amidst the noise of the storm. I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Suddenly, the door to the gas station swung open with a violent gust of wind, extinguishing the flickering light and plunging me into darkness. Frozen with fear, I sat back in my seat, listening intently. The whispers had transformed into desperate cries, the voices of those lost in the storm, reaching out for help. My heart raced as the realization dawned on me. These were not mere figments of my imagination, but echoes of souls trapped in the tempest, determined to escape the gas station. I fumbled for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers intensified, now accompanied by the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty space. Each step a haunting reminder of the storm's relentless grip. Panic set in as I struggled against the invisible force holding the door closed, the cries growing more frantic, their anguish palpable. In a moment of sheer terror, the door finally gave way, allowing me to flee into the storm once more. I rushed back to my SUV, the storm's fury unabated, the snow now a blinding blizzard that seemed to consume everything in its path. The whispers followed me, their voices intertwining with the howl of the wind, as if the spirits were trying to lead me back, to warn me of something beyond my understanding. When I finally made it back home, the storm had passed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a landscape transformed by its wrath. The house stood silent, the snow now a serene blanket covering the land. Laura and the kids were waiting anxiously, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear, as I recounted my harrowing experience. The sense of unease that had plagued me all night lingered, the whispers a haunting echo in my mind. In the days that followed, the memory of the storm and the shadowy figure haunted my thoughts. Laura noticed changes in both of us. Sleep became elusive, and a pervasive sense of dread settled over our once peaceful home. I delved into the local archives, seeking answers to the mysteries that had unfolded that fateful night. Through old newspaper clippings and whispered tales from the locals, I discovered a tragic history entwined with Pine Ridge. Years before, a family had been caught in a similar storm, their car found abandoned on the same stretch of road I had driven that night. The parents and their 2 children had perished, their bodies never recovered, leaving behind only the sorrowful whispers that seemed to linger in the winds. As I pieced together the fragments of their story, it became clear that the spirits of the lost family were trapped in an endless loop, reliving their final moments with each passing storm. Their desperate cries for help were echoes of their unresolved pain, forever bound to the storm that had claimed their lives. Determined to help them find peace, Laura and I sought the guidance of a local paranormal investigator, Dr. Eleanor Hayes. She arrived with a sense of calm authority, her presence a beacon of hope amidst the lingering shadows. Together, we performed a cleansing ritual, using candles, salt, and prayers to honor the lost souls and guide them towards the light. As we conducted the ritual, the atmosphere in our home shifted, the oppressive weight lifted, and the whispers faded into a gentle breeze, carrying with it a sense of closure. It was as if the spirits had finally found their way, their anguish replaced by a peaceful acceptance. In the weeks that followed, life returned to normal, the memory of the storm and the shadowy figure fading into the recesses of my mind. Yet, the experience left an indelible mark on our family, a reminder of the fragile balance between life and death, and the enduring power of compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through the trees and the snow begins to fall, I catch a faint echo of those desperate cries, a lingering reminder of the souls we helped set free and the storm that bound them to our world. It serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unending quest for peace amidst the chaos of nature. Story number 2. Whispers in the Gale. The first sign that something was amiss came as the sun dipped below the rugged Montana horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold. My wife, Laura, our 15-year-old daughter, Emma, and I were navigating the narrow, winding roads that cut through the heart of Montana's wilderness. It was early 2023, and what was meant to be a leisurely road trip across the state had quickly turned into a fight against nature itself. We had rented a sturdy SUV, well equipped for the unpredictable Montana weather. But nothing could have prepared us for the ferocity of the storm that was about to descend upon us. The weather had been calm for days, perfect for exploring the untouched landscapes and quaint towns scattered across the plains. However, as evening approached, dark clouds began to gather ominously on the horizon, their edges serrated by the first hints of lightning. We should find a place to stop before it gets worse, I suggested, glancing at the rapidly darkening sky. Laura nodded in agreement, while Emma, ever the adventurer, gazed out the window with a mix of excitement and apprehension. As we continued our journey, the wind picked up, howling through the gaps in the trees and sending leaves swirling in chaotic patterns across the road. The first few gusts were manageable, but it wasn't long before the storm unleashed its full fury. The snow began to fall in earnest, thick and relentless, reducing visibility to mere feet. The road became a treacherous ribbon of white, obscured by the swirling blizzard that enveloped us. Emma pressed her face against the window, mesmerized by the chaotic dance of snowflakes. Suddenly, through the thick curtain of white, I spotted something, or someone, standing on the side of the road. A shadowy figure, indistinct and blurred by the storm, loomed near the roadside. It was tall and imposing, its form barely visible against the tempestuous backdrop. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Dad, do you see that?" Emma whispered, her voice tinged with fear. I strained my eyes, squinting against the driving snow. The figure remained motionless, its presence unsettling in the midst of the raging storm. As we approached a particularly isolated stretch of road, the wind seemed to carry faint whispers, almost like hushed voices trying to communicate. "Probably just someone stranded in the storm," Laura suggested, attempting to reassure both Emma and myself. But deep down, a nagging unease settled over me. There was something unnatural about the figure we'd glimpsed, a presence that felt both distant and unnervingly close. As the storm intensified, the wind transformed, its howl morphing into distinct whispers that seemed to emanate from the very air around us. The voices were faint, fragmented, but unmistakably human. It was as if someone or something was trying to speak to us through the gale. "We need to pull over," I said firmly, taking control of the wheel. The SUV skidded to a halt on the side of the road, the engine struggling against the blinding snow. We sat in tense silence, the only sounds the relentless beating of the storm and the persistent whispers that seemed to envelop us. "Let's just wait it out," Laura suggested, her voice wavering slightly. Emma clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the storm raged on. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving through the howling wind like ethereal threads. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadowy figure we'd seen was still watching us, the silent gaze piercing through the storm. Suddenly, a particularly violent gust of wind battered the SUV, causing it to shudder violently. The windows rattled, and for a split second, I thought I saw the figure move, only to realize it had vanished without a trace. Panic surged through me as the whispers crescendoed into anguished cries, their meaning lost in the chaos of the storm. "We have to do something," Emma cried, her fear palpable. "They're trying to tell us something." Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to step out into the storm. Clutching Laura's hand, we ventured into the blinding snow, the wind whipping around us with a malevolent force. Every step was a struggle against the relentless gusts, but we pressed on, driven by a desperate need to understand the haunting whispers. As we reached the spot where the figure had stood, the storm seemed to momentarily subside, creating a pocket of eerie calm. The snow had piled high around us, muffling the sounds of the tempest. In the stillness, the whispers transformed into clear, sorrowful pleas. "Help us! Find peace!" Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she whispered, "We need to help them." Before we could react, a sudden surge of wind swept through the area, scattering the snow and extinguishing the faint glow of our flashlights. The oppressive silence was shattered by a deafening roar, and the storm resumed with renewed fury. The whispers faded into the background, replaced by the overwhelming force of nature's wrath. We retreated to the safety of the SUV, our breaths visible in the frigid air as we struggled to regain control of the vehicle. The storm showed no signs of relenting, the snow piling higher and the wind howling louder. The sense of being watched lingered, a haunting reminder of the encounter we'd just endured. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of white and silence. Exhausted and shaken, we exited the SUV to assess the damage. The road was buried under a thick blanket of snow, the surrounding wilderness eerily quiet. As we began to pack up, we discovered a series of footprints leading away from the spot where the shadowy figure had stood, a trail that disappeared into the dense forest, swallowed by the aftermath of the storm. "We need to leave now," I insisted, the memories of the whispers and the ghostly presence too unsettling to ignore. Laura and Emma nodded in agreement, and we hurriedly made our way back to the main road, the SUV struggling against the remaining patches of snow. The journey back was fraught with tension, the haunting memories of the storm and the whispers lingering in our minds. By the time we reached the safety of the highway, the town was already waking up, the residents emerging from their shelters to survey the damage and begin the cleanup. We drove through the quiet streets, our family bound together by the shared ordeal. In the days that followed, the experience left an indelible mark on us. Laura and I found ourselves replaying the events over and over, trying to piece together the meaning behind the whispers and the shadowy figure. Emma struggled with nightmares, reliving the fear of the storm and the mysterious voices that had echoed through the night. Jake, ever resilient, simply clung to us, seeking comfort in our presence. Determined to find answers, I delved into the local history of the area, uncovering stories of past storms and tragedies that had befallen the remote roads of Montana. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon the tale of the Lawson family, a family of 4 who had perished in a similar storm years earlier. Their car had been found abandoned on a desolate stretch of road, the only clue to their fate being a single, tarnished wedding ring left behind. The whispers and the shadowy figure began to make sense. It seemed that the spirits of the Lawson family were trapped in an endless loop, reliving the moment of their tragic demise every time a storm hit. Their cries for help and their desperate attempts to communicate were echoes of their unresolved pain, forever bound to the roads that had claimed their lives. Armed with this knowledge, Laura and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We reached out to local paranormal investigators and historians, seeking ways to help the lost souls find peace. Together, we organized a memorial service at the site where the Lawson family had lost their lives, hoping that a gesture of remembrance might finally allow their spirits to move on. The night of the memorial, the sky was clear, the stars twinkling brightly above the snow-covered landscape. We gathered with a small group of locals, lighting candles and sharing stories of the Lawson family. As we stood in silence, offering our prayers and condolences, a gentle breeze swept through the area, carrying with it a sense of tranquility. For a moment, it felt as though the spirits were present, their sorrow replaced by a peaceful acceptance. The shadows that had once haunted the roads seemed to dissipate, replaced by the warmth of shared compassion and remembrance. The whispers were gone, replaced by the soothing sounds of the night. In the aftermath, The road no longer felt like a place of fear but a path of remembrance and healing. The memory of the storm and the spirits that had touched our lives faded into the background. Replaced by a sense of closure and peace, our family moved forward, forever changed by the experience, but grateful for the strength and unity that had carried us through the ordeal. Years later, as I reflect on that harrowing night, I'm reminded of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead and the enduring power of empathy and compassion to bridge that gap. The roads of Montana hold countless stories, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unending quest for peace amidst the chaos of nature. And sometimes, when a storm approaches and the winds begin to howl, I can't help but think of the Lawson family and the whispers that once filled the night. It serves as a reminder to honor the memories of those who've been lost and to find strength in the bonds that hold us together, even in the face of the unknown. Story number 3. Echoes of the Storm. The first whispers of the storm began as a distant rumble on a warm September evening in 2022. New Orleans, with its vibrant streets and lively spirit, was no stranger to hurricanes and heavy rains. But this one felt different. Dark clouds rolled in swiftly, swallowing the twilight and replacing it with an ominous gloom that settled over the city like a heavy blanket. I'm Daniel Roberts, a travel writer who thrived on exploring the hidden gems of the world. When my wife, Sarah, and our 2 friends, Mike and Lisa, decided to take a last-minute trip to New Orleans for a blend of culture, cuisine, and history, I was all in. We had booked a stay at the Old Crescent Hotel, a historic establishment nestled in the heart of the French Quarter. Known for its charming architecture and storied past, the Crescent Hotel was a relic from another era, its facade adorned with intricate ironwork and weathered wooden balconies that seemed to whisper secrets of bygone days. Inside, the lobby was a mix of antique furniture and modern amenities, creating an atmosphere that was both nostalgic and welcoming. We settled into our rooms, eager to immerse ourselves in the city's rich tapestry. The first few days were everything we had hoped for, endless days of exploring the bustling streets, savoring beignets at Café du Monde, and cruising along the Mississippi River. The nights were spent in the cozy ambience of the Crescent Hotel, sharing stories and laughter over glasses of local wine. But as the week progressed, the weather took a turn for the worse. Forecasts predicted a severe storm system moving towards the Gulf Coast, and the skies over New Orleans darkened with an unsettling intensity. On the 3rd night of our stay, the heavens opened up, unleashing a torrent of rain and a wind that howled through the streets like a living entity. We were midway through a lively dinner in the hotel's grand dining room when the storm hit its peak. The windows rattled violently, and the lights flickered ominously. Mike suggested we head back to our rooms to ride out the storm, and we reluctantly agreed, knowing the chaos outside was too dangerous to brave. As we ascended the grand staircase, the sound of our footsteps echoed through the silent hallways. The air grew thick with tension, the storm's fury battering the old structure with relentless force. We reached our respective rooms, the door shutting behind us with a definitive thud that seemed to seal us off from the world outside. Later that night, as the storm raged on, an eerie stillness settled over the hotel. It was during the dead of night that I first heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway outside my room. At first, I dismissed it as the building settling or the noise of the storm's aftermath. But the sound grew louder and more deliberate, as if someone was pacing just beyond the door. Curiosity and unease gnawed at me, but I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks in the dark. However, as the minutes ticked by, the footsteps continued, always stopping just short of my door, lingering in the silence like a spectral presence observing me. Unable to bear the suspense, I decided to investigate. Quietly, I made my way out of my room, the hallway bathed in the dim glow of emergency lighting. The storm outside was a distant roar now, but the footsteps were unmistakable, their cadence slow and methodical. As I approached the end of the corridor, the sounds ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. Turning back, I noticed Lisa standing at the foot of the hall, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's dying rage. I nodded, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Yeah, it sounded like someone's walking towards us. Before Lisa could respond, the sound of footsteps returned, this time accompanied by faint, sorrowful whispers carried by the wind. The air grew colder, and an inexplicable dread settled over us. We exchanged uneasy glances, the unspoken fear between us palpable. Determined to uncover the source of the haunting, we decided to explore the hallway together. As we moved cautiously down the corridor, the footsteps resumed, leading us towards the grand ballroom, a room steeped in history and rumored to be the site of many grand celebrations and untimely tragedies. The doors to the ballroom stood ajar, the room illuminated by the flickering lights that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. As we entered, the atmosphere shifted, the air thick with the remnants of past festivities and the lingering sorrow of lost souls. The ornate chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals reflecting the dim light in a ghostly shimmer. In the center of the room stood an old piano, its keys yellowed with age, and an antique mirror hung above it, its surface dusty but still reflecting the room's grandiose architecture. As we approached the mirror, the temperature dropped further, our breaths visible in the cold air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with their mournful plea. Suddenly, the mirror began to shimmer, the reflection distorting as if a hidden presence was trying to communicate. Out of the foggy glass emerged the faint image of a woman, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She reached out towards us, her expression pleading, her mouth moving silently as if to say something we couldn't hear. "We need to help you," Laura whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and compassion. The image of the woman flickered, her form wavering like smoke in the wind. The oppressive atmosphere intensified, the whispers becoming desperate cries that echoed through the ballroom. We felt an invisible force pressing down on us, the weight of her anguish bearing down on our souls. Determined to assist the restless spirit, we began to speak softly, offering words of comfort and understanding. As we did, the room seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the shadows retreating and the air growing warmer. The image of the woman in the mirror softened, her sorrowful gaze meeting ours with a hint of relief. "Thank you," the whispers seemed to convey, the tension in the room dissipating like mist under the morning sun. The mirror returned to its ordinary state, the ballroom once again silent and still. We stood there, the remnants of the night's horrors fading into a peaceful calm. The following morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a serene stillness that enveloped the Crescent Hotel. The air was crisp, the sky a clear blue, and the world felt untouched by the chaos that had raged just hours before. We gathered in the lobby, sharing our experiences and the profound sense of closure that had settled over us. In the days that followed, the haunting ceased entirely. The footsteps and whispers were no longer heard, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by the warm and welcoming ambience that had drawn us to the hotel in the first place. We spent the remainder of our stay in peace, cherishing the moments of tranquility and the bonds that had deepened through our shared ordeal. As we packed our belongings to leave, I couldn't help but feel a lingering connection to the spirits that had once haunted the grand ballroom. The experience had taught us about the enduring power of compassion and the importance of honoring the memories of those who had suffered. The Crescent Hotel stood as a testament to our resilience, a place where we had faced the unknown and emerged stronger for it. Years later, when I recount that stormy Christmas night, the memory remains vivid, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. The Crescent Hotel still stands in the French Quarter, its walls holding countless stories of joy and sorrow, each echoing the whispers of the past. And sometimes, when a storm brews on the horizon, I catch a faint whisper on the wind, A lingering echo of the night, we reached out to help a lost soul find peace amidst the fury of the tempest. Story number 4. Shadows of Christmas Storm. The first snowflakes of December had just begun to settle over our small Mississippi town when the storm hit. I'm Michael Thompson, and my wife, Laura, our 16-year-old daughter, Emma, and our 10-year-old son, Jake, had been looking forward to our first Christmas in our newly purchased home. Nestled on the outskirts of Camden, the old Victorian house stood proudly against the sprawling fields, its white paint slightly peeling and windows gleaming under the winter sun. Moving into the house had been a dream come true. After years of renting in the city, we craved the tranquility of country life, a place where our children could roam freely and our minds could find peace. The first few weeks were idyllic, decorating the house, planting a garden, and embracing the slower pace of life. But as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, an unsettling feeling began to creep into our lives. It was Christmas Eve when the storm first made its presence known. The weather forecast had predicted heavy snowfall and strong winds, but nothing could have prepared us for the ferocity that descended upon our town. By the afternoon, the sky had turned a menacing shade of gray, and the wind began to howl through the trees, rattling the windows with increasing intensity. We decided to stay indoors, the warmth of our new home a stark contrast to the raging tempest outside. As night fell, the storm unleashed its full fury. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the dark clouds and casting eerie shadows through our windows. The sound of thunder echoed through the house, each rumble shaking the very foundation. Around midnight, as we sat together in the living room, Emma pointed out a peculiar change in the storm. "Dad, do you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I strained my ears, trying to make out the sound over the roar of the wind. At first, it was faint, a distant wail that seemed to be carried by the gusts. But as the night deepened, the noise grew louder, transforming into something more sinister. The wind outside no longer sounded like nature's fury. It morphed into anguished screams and strange, dissonant noises that sent chills down our spines. Probably just the storm intensifying. I tried to reassure Laura, though doubt gnawed at me. The sounds were too human, too emotional to be mere weather phenomena. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, making us all jump. "I'm going to check it out," I said, trying to mask my unease. Laura grabbed my arm, her face pale. "Be careful," she warned, her eyes darting nervously towards the staircase. I descended the stairs cautiously, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick rug. The living room was in disarray, books scattered across the floor, a lamp shattered near the doorway. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, trying to locate the source of the noise. There was no sign of anyone, yet the storm seemed to have breached every barrier of our home. Returning upstairs, I found Laura pacing the hallway, worry etched into her features. "I didn't see anyone," I said, frustration evident in my voice. Maybe it was just the house settling. But Laura shook her head. "I don't think so. Listen again." We stood in silence, the storm outside a relentless force. Then, the sound returned this time, unmistakably human. It was soft, almost pleading, echoing from the basement. My blood ran cold. "The basement," I whispered. Emma and Jake exchanged frightened glances, huddling closer to us. "Maybe someone got stuck in there," Emma suggested timidly. With Laura by my side, we made our way to the basement door. The house felt different tonight, as if the very air was thick with tension. I reached out, gripping the doorknob, and slowly descended the narrow staircase. The basement was dark, the only light coming from the weak beam of my flashlight. The storm's fury seemed distant here, muffled by the thick walls. As we ventured deeper, the sound grew clearer, heavy breathing, followed by a series of soft, mournful sighs. We reached the far end of the basement, where old furniture and boxes lay scattered. The breathing stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on us. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced menacingly across the walls. Jake gasped, clutching Emma's hand tightly. "What was that?" he whispered. Before I could respond, a cold draft swept through the basement, extinguishing the flashlight and plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled to turn it back on, but it refused to cooperate. The air grew colder, our breaths visible in the icy atmosphere. Then, out of the darkness, a figure materialized, a shadowy silhouette of a man standing motionless in the corner. His presence was unnerving, an invisible weight pressing down on us. The temperature plummeted further, and the oppressive silence was broken by a soft, sorrowful wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "Leave us alone," the voice echoed, filled with anguish and despair. The figure remained unmoving, his sorrowful gaze fixed on us despite the lack of visible eyes. Laura and I exchanged terrified glances, while Emma and Jake clung to us, their fear palpable. "We need to go," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. But as we turned to leave, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping us inside. The wails grew louder, the sounds of the storm outside now blending with the tortured cries from within the house. The shadows seemed to move, swirling around us like restless spirits. I felt a cold presence brushing against my skin, a reminder that we were not alone. Desperate to escape, I grabbed Laura's hand and pulled her towards the door, but it wouldn't budge. The basement felt alive with malevolent energy, the spirits of the past reaching out to us with their unresolved pain. The wails turned into voices, each one a haunting plea for release, echoing the tragic history of the house. As the tension reached its peak, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the basement, revealing the figure once more. His eyes, though invisible, seemed to bore into my soul, his presence a manifestation of the house's dark past. In that moment, I realized that the house itself was a vessel of sorrow, the spirits of those who had suffered trapped within its walls. Summoning every ounce of courage, I began to speak, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. "We're sorry for your pain. We want to help you find peace." The oppressive energy began to lift, the shadows receding as if acknowledging our plea. The figure started to fade, his sorrowful presence dissolving into the ether. The basement door creaked open, and the heavy atmosphere lifted, replaced by a peaceful stillness. We fled the basement, our hearts pounding with a mix of relief and lingering fear. The storm outside had subsided, the night calm once more. As we ascended the stairs, we found solace in each other's presence, grateful to have escaped the house's haunting grip. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences ceased entirely. The house returned to its former state of tranquility, the memories of that terrifying night lingering only as a shadow in our minds. But the experience left an indelible mark on our family, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the enduring power of compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. Years later, when I recount that stormy Christmas night, the memory still sends chills down my spine. The house on Cedar Lane stands as a testament to our resilience, a place where we faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I catch a faint whisper carried by the wind, a lingering echo of the souls we helped set free, forever entwined with our lives, reminding us of the fragile balance between peace and torment. Story number 5. Whispers in the Tempest. The Texas plains stretch out endlessly, a sea of golden grass under the vast expanse of the sky. When my wife, Laura, and our 2 children, Emma and Jake, decided to move to this remote part of the state, we sought solace from the chaos of city life. The old farmhouse we purchased stood proudly on the outskirts of a small town, its weathered facade and sprawling acreage promising a fresh start. Little did we know, our dream home harbored secrets that would soon plunge us into a living nightmare. I'm Daniel Harris, and moving to a new home had always symbolized hope and new beginnings for our family. The first few months were idyllic. We spent weekends fixing up the house, planting a garden, and exploring the surrounding countryside. The children reveled in their newfound freedom, running through the fields and making friends with the few neighbors who lived nearby. Life was simple, peaceful, a stark contrast to the relentless pace we'd left behind. But as autumn gave way to winter, an unsettling change began to descend upon our lives. It started subtly, whispers of cold drafts in the middle of summer nights, shadows flickering just beyond the reach of our flashlights, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Laura dismissed it as the quirks of an old house, but I couldn't shake the growing unease gnawing at me. One fateful night in November, a violent storm swept across Texas, unleashing winds so fierce they seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. We were huddled together in the living room, the windows rattling under the onslaught of rain and debris. Lightning illuminated the darkened room, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The children were asleep upstairs, their dreams untouched by the chaos outside. Suddenly, amidst the howling wind and pounding rain, we heard it, a faint, desperate call echoing from outside. It was a voice, soft yet unmistakably sorrowful, beckoning us. Startled, we exchanged fearful glances. Laura approached the window cautiously, peering into the tempestuous night. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she pointed to a faint silhouette standing amidst the raging storm. There, barely visible against the backdrop of lightning and darkness, was the unmistakable outline of a woman. Her figure was ethereal, almost translucent, her form wavering like a mirage caught in the fierce winds. She stood motionless, staring directly at us with eyes that seemed to pierce through the very soul. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. "Yes," Laura replied, her voice barely audible over the storm. There was someone out there, determined to understand what we were witnessing. I grabbed my coat and followed Laura outside. The wind howled around us, carrying with it the weight of the storm and the eerie presence of the apparition. As we approached the edge of the property, the woman began to move, her steps slow and deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out, desperate to communicate. But as soon as I took a step forward, she vanished into the tempest, leaving only the lingering echoes of her sorrowful call. Confusion and fear gripped us as we stood there, staring into the void where she had just been. The storm raged on, the wind whipping around us, as if trying to erase the memory of her existence. We returned to the safety of our home, but the encounter left us shaken and restless. The following days were marked by an escalation of strange phenomena. The temperature in the house would drop inexplicably, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Objects moved on their own, chairs sliding across floors, books falling from shelves, and doors slamming shut without warning. The whispers grew louder, their mournful tones echoing through the halls, as if the house itself was trying to communicate our presence. Desperate for answers, Laura and I delved into the history of the farmhouse. Our research led us to discover that before it became our home, the house had been the site of a tragic accident. A family of 4 had perished in a devastating fire during a severe storm in 1985. Reports were sparse, the details shrouded in mystery, but local lore spoke of restless spirits unable to find peace after the catastrophic event. One particularly harsh night, as another storm threatened on the horizon, the disturbances reached a fever pitch. The children were restless, sensing the growing tension in the air. As midnight approached, the wind outside intensified, howling like a chorus of lost souls. The whispers became anguished cries, filling the house with a palpable sense of despair. Suddenly, the living room was plunged into darkness as the power failed, leaving us in the eerie glow of candlelight. The temperature plummeted, and the oppressive presence pressed down on us. We could hear footsteps ascending from the basement, each step heavy with sorrow and anger. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness in search of the source. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, the sound of footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, The basement was a cavernous space, filled with old furniture and forgotten relics. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and decay, remnants of the tragedy that had once consumed the house. At the far end of the basement, I saw a mirror, its surface cracked and tarnished, reflecting the dim light with a haunting clarity. Approaching the mirror, I felt a cold chill wash over me. In the reflection, I saw not my own image, but the ghostly figure of a woman, her eyes hollow, her expression one of profound sorrow. She reached out towards me, her hand passing through the glass like mist. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing through the basement. Terrified, I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of old boxes. The mirror seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the figure growing more distinct and desperate. I turned to flee, but the basement door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The whispers turned into anguished cries, the air thick with the weight of countless untold stories. Desperate to escape, I pounded on the door, my pleas swallowed by the storm outside. The temperature continued to drop, my breath visible in the freezing air as the presence of the restless spirits pressed in around me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I began to recite a prayer I'd read in an old journal, hoping to offer solace to the tormented souls. As I spoke, the air seemed to lighten, the oppressive weight lifting ever so slightly. The ghostly figure in the mirror began to fade, her sorrowful gaze softening with each word. The basement door creaked open, and the anguished cries transformed into whispers of gratitude. Exhausted but relieved, I rushed back upstairs, finding Laura and the children huddled together in the living room. The storm outside subsided, leaving behind a calm stillness that filled the house. We sat together in silence, the memories of the night's horrors etched into our minds. The farmhouse felt lighter, the shadows receding as if the spirits had finally found the peace they had long been denied. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences ceased, and the house returned to its former state of tranquility. We made a conscious effort to honor the memories of those who had suffered, leaving offerings and maintaining a respectful silence in the areas where the spirits had lingered. The experience taught us the importance of empathy, the enduring impact of unresolved pain, and the resilience required to overcome the darkest of fears. Years later, as I sit on the porch watching the Texas sunset, I reflect on the tumultuous winter we endured. The farmhouse on Maple Drive stands as a testament to our journey, a place where we confronted the echoes of the past and emerged stronger for it. Sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees and the sky is painted with the colors of dusk, I catch a faint whisper on the breeze, a lingering reminder of the souls we helped set free and the love that binds us together, transcending the boundaries of life and death. Story number 6. Shadows in the storm. The Kansas plains stretch out endlessly, a vast expanse of golden wheat swaying under the relentless gaze of the midday sun. My wife, Laura, our 16-year-old daughter, Emma, and our 10-year-old son, Jake, were driving through this remote countryside in our aging SUV, seeking refuge from the chaos of the city. It was early 2024, and we had decided to take a spontaneous road trip to reconnect as a family, far away from the distractions and stresses that had begun to fray our bonds. We were heading towards a small town called Willow Creek, known for its serene landscapes and tight-knit community. The journey had been smooth until the afternoon skies began to darken ominously. Thick, menacing clouds rolled in, blotting out the sun and turning the sky a foreboding shade of gray. Laura glanced nervously at the horizon, sensing the brewing storm. "Looks like we're in for a rough night," she remarked, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. I nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "Let's hope it passes quickly." But as the wind began to pick up, whipping the tall grasses into frenzied waves, it became clear that this storm was no ordinary Kansas tempest. The SUV shook violently against the gusts, and the rain began to lash against the windshield, each droplet a tiny dagger. We decided to pull over at the next rest stop, hoping to wait out the worst of the storm. The rest stop was a desolate patch of land, surrounded by nothing but open fields and the relentless roar of the storm. We parked under a flimsy shelter, the metal roof barely holding back the fury of the elements. Inside, the air was thick with humidity and the scent of wet asphalt. We sat in silence, listening to the howling wind and the intermittent thunder that shook the ground beneath us. It was during one of these lulls that Emma first noticed them. "Look," she whispered, pointing towards the edge of the shelter. Outside, standing by the roadside, were shadowy figures, tall, indistinct silhouettes that seemed to blend into the darkness. Their presence was unsettling, like ghosts watching us from the veil between the living and the dead. Laura and I exchanged uneasy glances, but when we pressed closer to see, the figures vanished into the stormy night, leaving behind only the swirling winds and the echo of their silent vigil. "We must be seeing things," I tried to reassure her, though my voice wavered. But Emma wasn't convinced. "They looked like people. Why would they be here?" Before we could respond, the wind howled louder, and the storm intensified. As if reacting to our conversation, the figures returned, their forms now more defined, standing closer to our shelter. Jake clung to his seat, his eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, as our vehicle began to move again, the figures seemed to follow us, their dark forms reflecting in the rearview mirror. Each time we glanced back, they were there watching, waiting. The whispers started then, faint at first, carried by the wind like a distant echo. "Go back," the voices seemed to say, though the words were indistinct. Lost in the cacophony of the storm, Laura tightened her grip on the steering wheel. We should just get through this as quickly as possible. But the storm showed no signs of relenting. The wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, and the darkness outside felt oppressive, as if the very landscape was conspiring against us. The figures continued to appear and disappear, their presence growing more menacing with each passing minute. As night fell, the storm reached its peak. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the figures for fleeting moments before plunging us back into darkness. The whispers became clearer, more urgent, filling the SUV with an eerie presence. I could feel eyes boring into me, a relentless scrutiny that gnawed at my sanity. "Can you hear them?" I asked Laura, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her face pale. "Yeah, it's like they're trying to tell us something." Determined to protect my family, I decided to drive through the heart of the storm, hoping to outrun whatever spirits were tormenting us. The SUV strained against the ferocious winds, tires gripping the slippery road as we navigated through the tempest. The figures remained a constant presence in our mirrors, their silent gaze a reminder of the unseen forces at play. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated a figure standing directly in our path. My heart leapt into my throat as I slammed on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a screeching halt. The figure stood motionless, a dark silhouette against the stormy backdrop, its presence exuding an otherworldly menace. For a moment, everything was still. The storm paused as if holding its breath. Then, with a burst of wind, the figure vanished, leaving us in the eerie silence of the aftermath. The oppressive feeling lifted slightly, but the sense of being watched lingered, a haunting reminder of the night's horrors. We continued our journey, the storm gradually abating as dawn approached. The skies began to clear, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the remnants of the storm clouds. Exhausted and shaken, we finally reached Willow Creek, greeted by the calm after the tempest. But the experience left us deeply unsettled. In the days that followed, each member of our family felt the lingering effects of the storm. Emma struggled with nightmares of shadowy figures and whispering voices, while Jake became unusually quiet, his usual exuberance dampened by an unspoken fear. Laura and I felt a pervasive sense of unease, our bodies feeling weak and our minds foggy without any apparent cause. We sought answers from the local townsfolk, hoping to understand the nature of the spirits we had encountered. An elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, the town's unofficial historian, offered us some insight. That area has a dark history, she explained, her voice tinged with sorrow. Years ago, a tragic accident occurred here. A family lost their lives in a mysterious car crash during a severe storm, much like the one you experienced. Ever since, their spirits are said to roam the roads, unable to find peace. Her words resonated with our experience, explaining the shadowy figures and the whispers that had haunted us. Mrs. Thompson advised us to perform a cleansing ritual to honor the lost souls and help them move on, hoping it would alleviate the lingering unease within our family. That evening, under the guidance of Mrs. Thompson, we conducted the ritual. We lit candles, placed offerings of food and flowers along the roadside, and recited prayers of peace and remembrance. The air felt charged with emotion, the storm's remnants still whispering through the trees. As we completed the ritual, a profound sense of calm washed over us, the oppressive energy dissipating like morning mist. In the weeks that followed, the haunting memories began to fade, the nightmares subsided, and Jake's vibrant personality slowly returned. We felt a renewed sense of peace, believing that we had finally helped the restless spirits find their way to the afterlife. But the experience left an indelible mark on our family. We became more attuned to the unseen world, understanding that our journey through the storm had been more than just a physical ordeal. It was a confrontation with the lingering echoes of tragedy and loss. The Kansas Plains, once a symbol of vast openness and freedom, now held a deeper, more mysterious significance for us. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles through the trees and the moon casts a silvery glow over the fields, I catch a faint whisper carried on the breeze, a lingering echo of the spirits we encountered. It serves as a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and the enduring impact of unseen forces that shape our lives in ways we can scarcely comprehend. Our journey through that storm became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassion in the face of the unknown. We learned to honor the memories of those who had been lost, ensuring that their stories were never forgotten and that their spirits found the peace they so desperately sought. And as we moved forward, the Kansas winds continued to whisper their secrets, a haunting lullaby that bound us forever to the shadows of the past. Story number 7. Whispers in the Tempest. The first time I heard the storm was coming. The sky had turned an unnatural shade of green, swirling ominously over the Florida horizon. I'm James Mitchell, a freelance photographer who had moved to this quiet coastal town a few years ago, seeking both inspiration and solace from the chaos of city life. My wife, Laura, and our young daughter, Emily, had settled into the old Victorian house that overlooked the bay, its creaky floors and drafty windows adding to its charm. Life had been peaceful, almost idyllic, until that fateful night in late October 2023. The weather forecast had predicted a severe storm system brewing over the Gulf, but nothing could have prepared us for the fury that was about to descend upon our lives. It was around 8 p.m. when the first signs of the tempest began. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and rattling the shutters. Rain started to lash against the windows, the droplets turning into relentless sheets that obscured our view of the outside world. Laura and I were in the living room, Emily asleep upstairs, when I noticed a strange stillness amidst the chaos. The usual sounds of the storm seemed to momentarily pause, replaced by an eerie silence that sent a chill down my spine. Then, amidst the roaring wind and pounding rain, I heard it, a soft, heart-wrenching cry echoing from outside. It was the unmistakable sound of a woman in distress, her sobs carried by the gusts of wind. My heart raced as I turned to Laura, who sat silently beside me, her face pale with concern. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the storm. She nodded, fear evident in her eyes. I did. It sounded like someone crying. Driven by a mix of curiosity and unease, I decided to investigate. Grabbing my waterproof jacket and flashlight, I made my way to the back door, the storm making each step a challenge. The porch light flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows across the porch. As I stepped outside, the wind whipped around me, making it difficult to keep my balance. I scanned the perimeter of our property, trying to locate the source of the cries. The rain was so heavy that visibility was almost zero, but through the haze, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing near the edge of our yard. Her form was barely discernible, swaying gently in the wind, her face hidden beneath a hooded cloak. My pulse quickened as I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" There was no response, only the intensifying howl of the storm. I took a hesitant step forward, the ground slick with rainwater, but as I approached, the figure seemed to dissolve into the mist, leaving me standing alone amidst the tempest. Confused and unnerved, I returned inside, finding Laura waiting with worried eyes. That night, sleep eluded me. The memory of the mysterious figure lingered, her cries haunting my thoughts. Emily stirred in her bed, murmuring about a woman crying outside. Laura reached out, squeezing my hand reassuringly, but the unease between us had deepened. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by its fury. Debris littered our yard, and the once pristine garden was a tangled mess of broken branches and flooded flower beds. As we began assessing the damage, something caught my eye, a glimmer of metal partially buried in the mud near the edge of our property. I reached down to pick it up, revealing an old, tarnished wedding ring. My mind raced. Who could have lost such a valuable item here? Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of our house and the surrounding area. Through old newspaper archives and conversations with longtime residents, I discovered that before our family moved in, the previous owner, Margaret Lawson, had tragically died in a car accident during a similar storm a decade earlier. Reports were sparse, but whispers in town spoke of her sudden disappearance and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her death. As days turned into weeks, the eerie phenomena continued. The sounds of crying echoed through the house during the most violent storms, each time more intense than the last. Objects moved inexplicably, books flew off shelves, doors slammed shut without warning, and the temperature would drop sharply, leaving us shivering in the middle of summer nights. One particularly fierce storm hit in January, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. As the tempest raged outside, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing from the basement. Heart pounding, I descended the creaky wooden stairs, flashlight in hand, only to find the basement empty, no signs of intrusion, no evidence of anyone else being there. Yet, the feeling of being watched lingered, a constant presence that gnawed at my sanity. Determined to put an end to the haunting, Laura and I decided to perform a cleansing ritual. Guided by the local paranormal investigator, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, she explained that the lingering spirit was likely Margaret Lawson, her soul trapped by the unresolved pain of her untimely death. Together, we gathered candles, salt, and sage, preparing to banish the restless spirit from our home. As the next storm approached, we set up the ritual in the living room, the same place where Margaret's presence had been most felt. The wind howled outside, rain battering the windows, as we began chanting prayers and burning the sage to purify the space. The air grew thick with energy, the candles flickering violently as if resisting our efforts. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness as the power failed, leaving us in the eerie glow of candlelight. The temperature dropped even further, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The sound of heavy breathing filled the room, more intense and desperate than ever before. Laura and I stood together, holding each other tightly, as the spirit of Margaret Lawson materialized before us. Her apparition was sorrowful, her eyes hollow with eternal pain. "Why won't you help me?" she whispered, her voice echoing through the room like a mournful lament. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she reached out to comfort the lost soul. "We're here to help you find peace," she said softly, her voice trembling. Margaret's figure began to fade, the pain in her eyes slowly giving way to a sense of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her presence dissipating like mist in the morning sun. The oppressive energy lifted, replaced by a peaceful stillness that filled the room. The storm outside began to subside, the winds calming as if the very elements were acknowledging the resolution of our ordeal. We stood together in the quiet aftermath. The weight of the past lifted from our shoulders. The wedding ring, now lying harmlessly on the floor, seemed to lose its significance. This dark history finally laid to rest. In the weeks that followed, the haunting ceased entirely. Our home returned to its peaceful state, the shadows no longer moving on their own, and the cries of Margaret Lawson silenced by the closure we had provided. Life gradually returned to normal, our family finding solace in the calm that now surrounded us. But the experience left an indelible mark on us. We learned to respect the lingering memories of those who had suffered and the importance of compassion in easing their pain. The storms that once brought fear now felt like a reminder of the resilience we had shown in the face of the unknown. Sometimes, when a storm brews on the horizon, I glance out the window, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the peace we had reclaimed. The whispers in the tempest are no longer cries of anguish but echoes of a family finding their way to eternal rest. And as the winds dance through the Kansas plains, I'm reminded of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and the enduring power of love and empathy to heal even the deepest wounds.